In Ohio, a teenager convicted of a high school shooting that killed 3 students is back in custody after daring escape overnight. T.J. Lane climbed a prison fence last night with 2 prison inmates.
2014, high school shooter T.J. Lane broke out of prison with 2 inmates. While they were eventually caught, the consequences of this act changed the course of their lives for the worse. Let's take a look at 10 school shooters and at what harrowing events they experienced in prison. Number 10. T.J. Lane. One would expect that being arrested and taken to prison would transform a criminal for the better, changing his life for good. But I guess that wasn't the case for Thomas Michael T.J. Lane III. Born on September 19, 1994, in Cleveland, Ohio, Lane had a troubled upbringing and a history of behavioral issues. His parents were known to have a dysfunctional relationship, and he faced serious difficulties at home. Things got worse when his parents got divorced due to his father's abusive nature. Lane, attending Lake Academy, an alternative school for students with behavioral or emotional issues, didn't come as a surprise. There were even reports that he had a troubled relationship with other students and had a history of disciplinary problems. These early warning signs and a troubled family background contributed to the complex factors that eventually played a role in Lane's life as a whole. February 27, 2012, Lane walked into the cafeteria of Chardon High School and surprisingly opened fire with a .22 cal handgun, tragically killing 3 students, while 3 others sustained grievous injuries in the process. He was eventually arrested for the shooting and faced charges for the incident. What was really unsettling was that he didn't even seem to show any remorse during the court proceedings. He wore a white t-shirt that had the word killer written across the front on that day of his sentencing.
My left is Nicholas Burling, Geauga County Assistant Prosecutor, Mark Bartolotta, Geauga County Assistant Prosecutor, and from the Lake County Prosecutor's Office, Karen Colwell.
While he also showed the middle finger to the victims' families and laughed when they described him as an animal and a monster. I mean, that's probably one of the worst things any criminal can do, but for a guy like T.J. Lane, it was just the tip of the iceberg. He pleaded guilty to the charges and received 3 life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole. He was then incarcerated at the Allen Oakwood Correctional Institution in Lima, Ohio. Before his failed attempt at being Michael Schofield in a botched prison break, Lane's poor record was evidence of his trouble adapting to life behind bars. One significant incident was when the correctional officers noticed that he had 3 different tattoos on his chest. Because of this, he was given 10 days in segregation in July 2013. During that 18-month stay at Allen Correctional Institution, he accumulated 7 violations, which included incidents of smoking marijuana and displaying a disrespectful attitude towards superiors. Imagine being in prison and refusing to take on assignments because he allegedly refused to carry any out, twice while attending classes. His complaints about education always sounded like a tape on replay, and because of this, his teacher allowed him to draw in class. However, Lane would make images of himself with the word killer and doodle kitty cats over his math assignment. September 11th, 2014, the unrepentant Lane, in addition to 2 other inmates, broke out of that institution, and this was achieved by constructing a 13.5-foot makeshift ladder over several months and evading a broken security camera that negligently remained unrepaired after being struck by lightning. However, they didn't get very far before they were caught. This warranted a transfer to the state's most guarded prison, the Ohio State Penitentiary, in Youngstown, where he was placed under tighter security and restrictions. The highest level of security given to him and being placed in protective custody is due to the severity of his 3-person killing spree in 2012 at Chardon High School, and because of his threats against his life from other inmates. He was eventually moved to Warren Correctional Institution to live out his remaining years. Number 9. Vincent Rodriguez. January 2002. Vincent Rodriguez, an 18-year-old student at Martin Luther King Jr. High School, perpetrated a heinous act by taking the lives of two students who had taunted his girlfriend. Although he faced legal consequences for those actions, his life behind bars wasn't only a fitting retribution for that grievous crime he committed, but also a circumstance that drove him to the abyss of madness. A few days before the incident, both victims, Andre Wilkins and Andrell Napper, engaged in a confrontation with Rodriguez's girlfriend and started a fight. Rodriguez, probably trying to be the boyfriend of the year, came to her rescue, but the odds were stacked against him. There was really little he could do in this situation, so he decided to bring a gun to school and prove to his girlfriend that indeed he is a tough guy. 8:46 a.m., January 14th, 2002. Rodriguez walks through the metal detectors at the school's entrance, gaining access to the premises. At this point, it was believed that he wasn't with a gun because they didn't go off. However, at around 1:50 p.m., Rodriguez went outside and confronted the victims in a hallway. During their confrontation, 3 gunshots rang out in the school's premises. As the students scrambled to safety, Rodriguez ran out of the building, leading to a manhunt. After about 96 hours, Rodriguez was found in a stolen Nissan car along with 2 of his friends right outside his grandma's house. It actually took really long to get this guy because, according to reports, Rodriguez attended school so rarely that a good number of students didn't even know who he was. Subsequently, he was arrested and charged with attempted murder, assault, and other lesser charges. But here's the catch. Rodriguez would have easily gotten the max sentence of 25 years if he had gone to trial. Instead, his guilty plea and a history of mental illness and fear of gang violence swayed the Manhattan Supreme Court Justice Daniel Fitzgerald to cut him a break. He was given 10 years behind bars to be served at Metropolitan Correctional Center. The institution in question has gained notoriety for its profoundly inhumane treatment of inmates. Some cases include individuals being coerced into solitary confinement. Others are subjected to physical abuse to the point of losing consciousness at the hands of guards. And in the case of Rodriguez, getting constantly bullied by older inmates for being a sucker for his girlfriend on the outside. To be more specific, this whole thing happened because Wilkin and Napper, the victims of his shooting, took off his girlfriend's bandana in the school's hallway. That could have easily been overlooked, but not by Rodriguez. Even though we have no indication of him completing his entire sentence, we have strong reason to believe that his whole time spent in this contemporary purgatorial facility was nothing short of harrowing. Number 8. Stephen R. Williams. 10:30 a.m., April 14th, 2003. 2 men, armed with an AK-47 and a semi-auto pistol, entered John McDonough High School in New Orleans, Louisiana. Their mission was to kill a student named Jonathan. Unfortunately, they succeeded, but those repercussions turned out to be far more severe than they had anticipated. The 2 men in question were Stephen R. Williams and James Tate. However, they had other accomplices. On the day of the incident, they entered the campus through a broken fence and headed to the gym where they knew Jonathan would be. Once they got in, they spotted him and shot him at least 20 times. 3 other students got injured in the process, and a pregnant senior was almost trampled to death by a stampede of students. Williams and Tate immediately fled the scene. That wasn't the end of that story. During police interrogation, it was discovered that Williams and Tate killed Jonathan because they believed that he had orchestrated the murder of another high school student a week before his own death. The student in question was Hillard Head Smith, who was found dead in front of an abandoned house. Though no arrests were made in response to Smith's death, word got around that Jonathan was the killer. So in turn, Smith's girlfriend, Michelle Fulton, and his cousin, Raymond Brown, hired Tate and Williams to murder Jonathan. Now, once the deed was done, the cops used that information they got from John McDonough High School students to track down and arrest Williams and Tate. But before then, it was discovered during an autopsy that Jonathan had a gun in his pocket when Williams and Tate shot at him. The crazy twist was that its bullets matched the same ones found in Smith's body. Tate pleaded guilty to manslaughter and conspiracy to commit second-degree murder, receiving a 15-year sentence, while Williams, who initially pled not guilty, was found guilty by a competent jury and was handed a mandatory life sentence, as is custom by Louisiana law. Williams, as part of his sentence, would be expected to serve 40 years with hard labor and will not be eligible for parole, probation, or suspension of sentence. Make a long story short, Williams will be spending his days in this realm of torment. Number 7. Brenda A Spencer. January 29, 1979. Brenda Ann opened fire at Cleveland Elementary School in San Diego, California, using a rifle given to her by her father as a Christmas gift. She killed 2 adults, injuring 8 and a police officer.
8 children who were shot. It was a heinous and horrific crime.
While the sinister act didn't go unpunished by the law, her life in prison served as a reminder that killers deserve nothing but the worst. Born on April 3, 1962, in San Diego, California. Challenging circumstances marked Spencer's life pretty early on, compounded by this troubled upbringing. Growing up in a broken home, her father reportedly had issues with alcohol and left the family, leaving Brenda and her 2 siblings to be raised by their mother. For Spencer, poverty was the order of the day, served on a dish of instability. She had a history of being absent from school, and there were indications of substance abuse at an early age. All these factors guided her down this deep, dark path that eventually shaped the course of her life. Now, Spencer's motivation for that shooting was revealed to be a combination of personal grievances and a desire for attention. During the incident, when asked why she did it, she infamously replied, "I don't like Mondays," providing a chilling insight into that mindset of hers. Following her arrest, Brenda pled guilty to 2 counts of murder and assault with a deadly weapon. April 4th, 1980. She was given 25 to life in prison.
As to counts 1 and 2, the sentence is 25 years to life.
At the California Institution for Women in Corona, where she initially worked by repairing electronic equipment to be useful. But after a few years, she began seeking ways to get out. In 1993, she became eligible for a parole hearing. At her first hearing, she stated that she'd hoped the police would shoot her at the scene of the crime, and that she had been a user of alcohol and drugs prior to that crime. While the drug test performed didn't support that statement, the test conducted upon her initial custody came out negative. 2001. At her second parole hearing, Spencer made claims that her father had been subjecting her to beatings and sexual abuse. However, her father effortlessly denied these allegations. The parole board chairman said that, as she had not previously told anyone about the allegations, he doubted their authenticity. And really, I think anyone would. But despite being rejected again, her request to leave this hellish replica of a dungeon only intensified. In 2005, she tried playing the insanity card in a bid to get sent to a mental institution. She claimed the words scratched into her arm were courage and pride, instead of the actual words, unforgiven and alone. This particular sighting dragged on for years, until 2009, when a board, again, refused her parole application and ruled that she wouldn't be reconsidered for another 10 years. Right now, after more than 4 decades behind bars, Brenda A Spencer remains incarcerated at the California Institution for Women. Her next opportunity will be in 2025. Will she be granted parole? I guess we'll have to wait and find out. Number 6. Eric Houston. May 1st, 1992. 20-year-old Eric Houston, a former student at Lyndhurst High School, Olivehurst, California, arrived at campus armed with a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun and a sawed-off .22 cal rifle. As he entered the premises, he fatally shot Robert Brenz, his former civics teacher during his senior year. Then he shot and killed Judy Davis, a student in Brent's classroom. Houston then walked through the hallway and fatally shot student Jason Edward White in the chest. At this point, the entire school was in lockdown procedure, yet Houston remained far from completing his murder spree. He entered a classroom of about 30 students, subsequently coercing an additional 50 into a hostage situation. And if you're wondering how he got out of this perplexing situation, you first need to understand the catalyst that pushed Houston to this level of madness. Without going too deep in the details, Houston was frustrated over losing his job and was angry at the fact that he failed to graduate from the high school or obtain a GED. For context, Houston was a student at Lyndhurst High before dropping out due to poor grades. From there, he got disconnected from reality and just ended up failing at life. His girlfriend left him, he lost his job, and he wasn't happy with anything. He also held a grudge against his civics teacher, Mr. Brenz, for failing him in an economics class back in '89. But of course, none of these are an excuse to kill anybody, right? Well, for Houston, They were. So after about gathering 80 hostages in a single classroom, Houston engaged in an 8-hour standoff with the cops. Releasing several students throughout the day while negotiating with the police, he eventually surrendered to authorities at about 10 p.m. after receiving a contract promising him he would serve no more than 5 years in a minimum security prison. Now, over the age of 40, he's spending time on death row, waiting to be executed. He's locked up at San Quentin State Prison, California, the oldest one in the state. It's the only death row in California for male inmates. For Houston, he really hasn't been on his best behavior since being incarcerated. But at the same time, he stands to become the first person ever executed by the state of California since 2006. He'll be taken out by lethal injection, as that's the only permissible form of execution by California law. While on death row, Houston has appealed his sentencing. But as per ruling by the California Supreme Court, his trial was fair, and his death penalty was upheld. Number 5. Charles Andrew Williams. Have you ever experienced bullying and humiliation, sought help from a counselor, but were ultimately denied that opportunity? Can you imagine that kind of frustration? Well, you can try to imagine what went on in the mind of Charles Andrew Williams before he carried out this incident, changing the course of his life forever. Born on February 8, 1986, in Frederick, Maryland, Williams had a troubled upbringing. His parents divorced when he was young, and he had a strained relationship with his father. His mother, Melinda, struggled with mental health issues and substance abuse. Their family moved to California, where Williams enrolled at Santana High School in Santee. Being overly bullied by his classmates and isolated from social activities would ultimately kickstart a sixth sense in Williams to gain a little popularity. And by that, we mean to carry out one of the most outrageous school shootings of all time. March 5th, 2001, Williams took a .22 cal revolver to that high school in Santee, California to carry out this attack. The incident resulted in the death of 2 students and inflicted injuries on 13 others. After the crime, Charles was arrested and charged with murder and attempted murder. The next year, he pled guilty to those charges against him, which was an effort to avoid trial. Consequently, he was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was initially ordered to serve his time in the youth offender program at CCI, Tehachapi, until his 18th birthday, March 1st, 2004. Charles Williams was taken to an adult prison. But here's something. While in prison, he was kept in protective custody because he refused to stab another inmate. Feeling saddened by that incident and harboring remorse, Williams claimed in an interview that he believes he deserves to be where he is currently. Despite expressing that prison is challenging, he has persevered through the difficulties. On the flip side, he has embarked on a different journey, finding his faith in Christianity and hoping to get a better life than he had ever lived. Currently incarcerated at the California Institution for Men in Chino, California, Williams is set to become eligible for parole in March 2024 at the age of 38. Number 4. Jason Kinard. March 2nd, 2005, Jason shot his school bus driver, a lady named Joyce Gregory, 3 times with a .45 cal semi-automatic pistol after she opened those loading doors. Consequently, he fled into the woods behind his house and disappeared. A day before that incident, Joyce reported Kinard to the school authorities for dipping smokeless tobacco on the bus. This obviously angered Jason to the point where he snuck a gun to school and waited till he was about to get dropped in front of his home to shoot Joyce. After being shot in multiple places, Joyce tried calling out for help. She slumped to the ground and lost control of the bus. One of Jason's nephews, who was also on that bus, tried driving all the kids to safety but ended up crashing into a pole. Upon realizing what he had done, Jason immediately called his mom, telling her about what happened and that he was heading to the police station. In turn, Jason would be arrested. Despite being a minor, he was tried as an adult, which resulted to a 51-year sentence being served at the Northeast Correctional Complex, Tennessee. However, his life in prison isn't what you might think. While in here, Jason had appealed a half dozen times for post-conviction relief. and that his case be returned to juvenile court. At the same time, he was diagnosed with certain mental conditions that drove him to carry out the shooting that day. Nonetheless, the prosecution believed it was a premeditated murder, and about 24 other students witnessed that traumatic event. As the years flew by, Jason maintained his best behavior and did everything possible to stay in the good graces of the law. September 2023, after 18 and a half years, Jason Kinard was released from Northeast Correctional Complex and was no longer under court supervision, meaning he wasn't on probation. He'd been convicted as a 9th grader, but took the initiative and earned a GED while incarcerated. And although this news really angered the family of Joyce Gregory, many people believe that whatever transpired in Kinard's life while behind bars and the experiences he must have gained might have been sufficient to pay for him a better future. Number 3. Tao Wimberly. We've all been there where we really wanted to be with someone, so we went all in, perhaps making advances, only to face rejection. The inability to cope with that is what pushed Taya into a life consumed by overwhelming regret and excruciating pain. Born on September 30th, 1993, Wimberly was left to be cared for by her grandparents at 6 weeks old. Her parents got separated before she was born, leaving Wimberly to be sexually assaulted by a family member throughout her childhood. By the time she was a teen, Tao Wimberly and Amanda Collette, both sophomores at Dillard High School, were very good friends all the way back from elementary, but randomly stopped talking to each other. From the look of things at the time, Wimberly was romantically interested in Collette, and in her way, was making advances toward her, seeking a romantic relationship. But as it would turn out, Collette was not interested, and she rejected Wimberly's advances. This enraged her, turning her love into an obsession to kill. November 12th, 2008, Wimberly bought a .22 cal chrome pistol to school. She approached Collette and tried starting a conversation with her. However, Collette simply walked out on her. Wimberly got upset, forcing her to pull out her gun and shoot Collette in the back. Realizing the grave mistake she had committed, Taya ran to a local restaurant where she called 911 to report what she had done. The police were swift to arrive, arresting her, seizing her gun, and charging her as an adult. She was initially ordered to be held in jail for 21 days, and for her to undergo a psych eval before a subsequent trial. She was given second-degree murder and discharging a weapon on school property in the killing of Amanda Collette. At her trial, she wrote a special apology to Collette's mom, saying, "I robbed you of Amanda." And she also made an apology to her own family. She was given 25 years in prison at the Florida Women's Reception Center. She served the first part of the sentence at a juvenile facility and was later transferred to an adult prison. Just like other inmates while being incarcerated, she was engaging in character-based programs, alongside other activities set out for her. She is expected to be released on March 12, 2033. Number 2. John Jason Mcclaflin. September 24th, 2003, John arrived at Rockery High School, Minnesota, with a loaded Colt .22 cal handgun intending to kill one of his biggest bullies, named Bartell. However, this only set Mcclaflin up for a life of pain and misery. Born on July 19, 1988, Jason was the only child of Mary and David Mcclaflin. He was a reserved kid who loved to help his parents a lot without complaint. Hanging out with his peers and playing video games were the activities he also loved. But as time went on, he became more reserved and withdrawn. The reason, you ask? Well, he developed severe acne. Now, it is believed that his self-consciousness about this acne came as a result of some kids picking on him, most especially a kid named Seth Bartell, who was relentless in doing so. What Seth didn't know is that there was only so much Jason could take. On the day of the incident, Jason met Seth and his friend, Rollins, as they were exiting the school's locker room. Upon sighting him, he shot Bartell, hitting him in the chest. Jason would fire a second shot, hitting Rollins in the neck, killing him instantly. Bartell, bleeding profusely at this point, attempted to flee the scene, but he was followed by Mcclaflin, who fired yet another shot and hit him in the forehead. Mark Johnson, the gym coach, came up confronting Jason, who initially brandished the gun at Johnson, but then emptied the bullets from the gun and dropped it. Mark obtained the firearm and escorted Mcclaflin to the school's administration's office, where cops came to arrest him. On July 5th, 2005, when his trial started, 6 doctors were brought in to testify in court, stating that he was indeed fit to stand trial. As a result, Jason was found guilty of first and second-degree murder, and a few months later, he was given 2 consecutive prison sentences, 1 life sentence for first-degree murder, and 12 years in prison for second-degree murder, all to be run concurrently. On top of that, he was given an order by the court to pay a restitution fine of $15,000 to the Minnesota Crime Victims Reparations Board. He was initially incarcerated in Minnesota's correctional facility, Stillwater, where he was engaged in different programs, ranging from industrial and educational to the Atlantis Chemical Dependency Treatment Program. After a few years there, he was moved then to this facility, the Minnesota Correctional, Oak Park Heights, and he'll not be eligible for parole until 2038, when he'll be 50 years old. And number 1, Jason Anthony Hoffman. Now, apart from being a pretty big kid, often being called an adult, Jason was known to be well-mannered, well-liked, and got a lot of respect from students. Maybe out of fear of his stature, or maybe because of his seemingly lovely personality. But a significant trait Hoffman had was difficulty in controlling his anger. Born on March 10, 1983, little Hoffman resided with his single mom, Denise Marquez, and was recognized for actively assisting in the neighborhood. However, it became evident that he was harboring a troubled mind, influenced by a series of events. On one hand, the assistant principal at Granite Hills High disciplined him regularly for undisclosed reasons, and on the other, he experienced distress as he attempted to enlist in the Navy 2 days before the tragic incident, only to face rejection. Now, the reasons for rejection remain unclear, but its effect on Hoffman was very evident. March 22, 2001, Hoffman, having recently turned 18, drove to his school in a pickup truck, armed with a 12-gauge shotgun and a .22 pistol, a few minutes before 1 p.m. He walked toward the administration building in search of the assistant principal. Upon seeing him, Hoffman opened fire, but missed his target. He would end up striking 3 students and 2 teachers. Eventually, he was stopped by a police officer and took 2 shots to the butt. He was taken to the hospital for treatment, and once he was discharged, he was arrested and charged with murder. During his trial, Hoffman pleaded guilty to 6 felony counts. At the time of making this plea, his lawyer, Mr. Traynor, stated that Hoffman was extraordinarily remorseful for his actions, but that didn't sway the jury in his favor. After standing trial for a few months, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison. That sentence marked the beginning of his end. October 29, 2001, shortly before 1 a.m. at San Diego Central Jail, Jason Anthony Hoffman took his own life by hanging himself with a sheet in his jail cell. This was a troubled young man who met a poignant and sorrowful demise.